Welcome to the NCO Journal podcast, where we explore NCO professional development. This is a podcast series where we discuss published articles with authors and provide a forum for the open exchange of ideas, information, and solutions. I'm your host, Staff Sergeant Brandon Cox, Senior Editor with the NCO Journal. With us is Chaga Zapata, Managing Editor, Tony Mena, the Senior Editor, and special guest Dr. Robert Thompson, the Army University Press Films Team historian, whose focus of study is on the Vietnam War. Today, we discuss the article We Were Ghosts, a Vietnam Story. With us, Travis Maruska, an Associate Professor of Writing and Media Studies at the Anna Maria College in Paxton, Massachusetts. Thank you for joining us. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
A little bit about me. Well, as you say, I'm an Associate Professor of Writing and Media Studies. I was born on a military base, Fort Polk, Louisiana, where my father was a company commander at that time, and I have not served myself, but I do come from a military family. So I've always been drawn to stories of veterans and in combat specifically. And so when I met this individual, I naturally had an interest, and it turned into a relationship.
Could you give us a brief description of your article and what it's about?
Sure. I had the opportunity to interview a veteran of the Vietnam War, specifically a Green Beret, someone in Special Forces who was there between 64 and 65, and get his firsthand account of his experiences and pass them on as best I could.
What was the inspiration? Why is it that you decided to write about it and not just kind of, okay, you know what, that's a great story, and then move on?
Well, I had known this individual for a while, and I interacted with him at one point, and he said, well, he approached me and he said, I said, hey, how are you, sir? And he quickly responded, I'm not a sir, I work for a living. And I knew from speaking with my father what that meant was that, he had served and he was not an officer. And so I asked him a few questions just off the cuff. We were standing in my driveway, and he relayed a story to me, which I think I originally included in the article, but it didn't get included in the final version, and it was quite harrowing and shocking to me, something that he had been through. And I guess he was in a mood to share at that moment, or just it came out. And of course, it just stayed with me. It stayed with me over the next year or so. And it was this nagging question or idea in the back of my head that somebody really needs to hear this person's story, that I could tell he had been through quite a bit. And if he was willing to, the story should be passed on. And I thought, well, I guess it should be me, since, I'm the one, I'm a writer and I teach writing. So I reached out to him, and he was willing to speak as long as I kept it anonymous. So we proceeded from there.
There was just for context, you said that he served from 65 to 66. Is that correct?
No, I believe he was. I'd have to check the article just to be sure, but I believe he was in country from 64 to 65.
Well, just like I said, just for context, and that's one of the things too that it's good to have Dr. Thompson here with us, is that he can maybe give us a little background on what life was like, or what soldiers were going through around the time that Jerry, this soldier, served. So. Maybe
Sure.
you could tell us a little bit about that, Rob, and maybe just kind of a little background again. His focus of studies is on the Vietnam War, so I mean.
Sure. So Jerry would have been a part of MAG-V, or Military Assistance Advisory Group Vietnam, the precursor to MAC-V, and this entity was designed to help train the South Vietnamese to fight the communist guerrillas, the North Vietnamese. So its primary mission was supposedly just to train, unofficially, yes, it was actively fighting, and we see that in the article. So there are Americans engaged in combat, but again, primary mission is training, because the United States is not, in the war. It's just training, but that's
right.
A lot of gray area and all of that. And this is the part of the legacy of like the Kennedy administration helping combat the spread of communism just through these advisory efforts. And you have MAG programs around the world, South America particularly. But what's cool, I liked about this article is you have Jerry coming at the tail end of it, So that's really interesting. So this one piece kind of helps shows us this secret American conflict, and then we're going to see that where we know from films, popular culture. So this piece is like this transition. We get to see it through Jerry's eyes, but we also see that it wasn't just training. He mentions in the beginning of the Vietnamese weren't particularly keen on being trained. That's that probably depends on who you were, where you were, but we also get the war is changing. It's going to become an American war.
Yeah, I enjoyed the fact that I got a perspective, I guess, on that moment, or as you say, that period of time before it became an American war, when I suppose maybe there was some more optimism that it would go a different way. I'm not sure, but it was unique to me, and Jerry was a unique individual to talk to.
I think that, at least to me, that's the most important part of telling this story, is because it's an inspiration. When you talk to somebody who has these experiences and goes through something so harrowing, as you put, it really is inspirational and makes you want to think about that, kind of pushes you forward into a direction that you might not have known you would have went. A couple of very popular movies like Saving Private Ryan, We Were Soldiers, stuff like that. Watching those as a kid kind of propelled me into thinking about the military when I normally wouldn't have, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, cinema definitely has an influence on us. And in fact, that was one of the things that interested me so much about the Vietnam conflict was I grew up, in the 80s, and my father had served during that period of time. And there were so many of these films coming out in the mid 80s, the 10th anniversary, Platoon and Full Metal Jacket and things like that. And I saw, these movies seeming to represent a different kind of conflict than I'd known growing up, previous to that, John Wayne films and whatnot. And so the cinematic representation really piqued my interest into the Vietnam conflict. And so I've read a lot about it since then.
I find it interesting we mentioned like the 80s films, because there's the scene where Jerry mentions his first kill, and it's a Vietnamese sniper, and that took me back to the scene in Full Metal Jacket where one of the main characters is confronted with having to kill a female sniper, and then
Private Joker.
Private Joker. Thank you. And it's like a scene also too that she acts and then ends up begging him to finish her off. Yeah. And we also saw that earlier in your piece that Jerry has, someone asking him don't leave me behind.
Right.
So I was like, that's really cool that, quintessential 80s movie on the Vietnam War that's, loosely based on a lot of real things, but still is taking a lot of liberties, but yet in this very real piece, we kind of get some truth that we can oh yeah, I remember seeing that scene. But to Jerry, that was real.
There were a couple of moments, writing it and listening to it, when the story or what was happening just sounded so surreal. This does sound like something out of a movie, and yet this really happened. And the movie version is always melodramatic. But, the movie is inspired. We know these things happened. We know people went through this and had to carry out those actions. And how did that change them? What did that do to them afterwards? And so having seen all those films, actually hearing it from someone firsthand was quite striking.
The final version of your article is not quite reflective of the initial submission. And there were quite a few things that we had to kind of take out during the editing process, which I would like to discuss a little further here with Tony in a second. But sure. I know that there were certain things in there that they were gritty, they were true, they were interesting to read, but it was just we just in good conscience we couldn't really leave them in there. Part of the edit, being a writer, one of the things that you have to be aware of and be prepared for is it goes through several changes. So what do you think about that? About the
it's funny. I was actually talking about it with my dad last night, and we're talking about the fact that we can't. Sometimes reality is too harsh, and we package reality for the masses, for the individuals. We have to make these considerations as to what can be told and what shouldn't be told, and that's true with film, and that's true with this. I saw that certain things were taken out. It made sense to me, and I'll tell you something as well, is that I took things out before I submitted it to you, because there were things that Jerry told me that I felt I couldn't pass on either. So we each took our own part in this editing process, and deciding what is palatable and what is acceptable. And I guess that's how we deal with reality and with war and with some of these very difficult topics. We want to know more about them, but we don't want to know too much, I think, at the end of the day.
Well, also, I mean, if you think about it, some of the things that I'm sure he told you would be walking that line where there would be consequences, and I'd rather that we stay away from that and we stay focused on his story and give him, the recognition and the acknowledgement of his service and thank him in the way that we are now, by talking about this article and by continuing, his legacy and his by talking about his experiences.
Absolutely. Jerry's one of those individuals who, well, I guess I'll, using a plaque here that's on my father's wall in his office, that he's a veteran, and when a veteran basically at one point in his life gave a blank check to to his country and said, up into my life, whatever it takes. He made the ultimate, he gave up so much of his time, and he carries it so inconspicuously. It was happenstance that I was able to run into him and talk to him and know what he'd been through, and then talk to him more and interview him. But he's not one of these guys who goes around and, tries to broadcast it, because I think he's wrestled so much with what he did. And something occurred to me the other day is that when these individuals, whether they're in Iraq or Afghanistan or Vietnam or whatnot, when they come back from these experiences and what they did in the service of their country, and they successfully deal with it to the point where they can re-enter society, there's no parade for that. Their success is that they remain anonymous. Their success is that nobody notices. And that when I thought of that really struck me.
Was it difficult at the beginning? I mean, I know you were trying to build trust with Jerry, and he had a great story. And then at some point you realize, like, I want to make a story out of this. People need to know his story. Was it difficult to get him to initially sit down and talk with you?
No, not really. I was surprised there was a difference. The first time we broached the topic in my driveway, I think he was quite open with telling me something that was quite striking. And when I approached him in a more official capacity to sit down, or we did it over Zoom during the pandemic, and talk with me, then I felt a little bit like the guard went up, and he was more hesitant. And so that took some, reassurances, in my mind after that initial encounter, he was just going to be, throwing the stories out and this, and then we did this, and then we did that. And in fact, it was, I could tell as we were talking, he was pausing, he was considering, what do I want to say here? How can I phrase this in a delicate way? And so we, but as we continued on, I think it got easier. I just enjoyed it. Hearing his, I couldn't get enough of it, to be honest.
Since that initial conversations, like now, do you find him more open? Like, does he stop you to want to talk more? Or I'm just curious to see, like, how your in a way, like, I guess, professional relationship has developed with him?
No, I wouldn't say that. I think we're still pretty casual. We still like to see each other. There does feel sort of like this, I don't want to say bond, but connection or understanding that, feel like I have with him, but I would never, take advantage of or betray. He's just a great guy. He's just a great guy. And, I always love hearing how he's doing.
Too many stories nowadays have been lost. I mean, if you look at World War II, most of those guys are gone. So whatever you read in the textbook is in the textbook. But what really happened and how it really felt in that moment for a lot of those missions and operations is now gone, because a lot of those guys are gone. I hope that more people, at least nowadays, talking about Fallujah or talking about anything, now moving into a possibly next near-peer war. I hope that people keep this in mind, like we need to write this stuff down, because that same mindset you were talking that Jerry had, right, not wanting to talk to anybody about it, put it away in a lockbox. I know so many soldiers nowadays that do the same thing, and they're going to end up the old, Jerry that still has never told anybody, never told his wife. So I think it's very important that our listeners, especially and our soldiers, remember that we need to keep these things relevant and tell each other about it, because I think it helps psychologically too.
And that brings up a point too. I mean, the purpose of the NCO Journal is to, I guess it's about NCO professional development, and there's the stories that people tell. There's messages. There's lessons to be learned there. If anything, at least to learn what it was back in the day, or to keep history alive, to keep traditions alive, to keep that, for lack of a better term, the tradition of victory alive. The kind of things that we go through, the experiences that soldiers go through, that when they tell those stories, the younger individuals, the ones who come later, are going to be able to learn and maybe continue that tradition.
And it really just blows the doors off of movies and cinematic representations. When you hear it or read it firsthand, when the words, and you can picture it, and this is the firsthand account. It's so much more true than the cinematic representation.
In some cases, better.
No, almost always. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's no creative license being used. It's all real.
Right.
I agree.
Right. You're not watching an actor pretending. You're hearing it from the person who was there.
I think it's interesting too how you guys were talking about earlier. Jerry gave you kind of a watered down aspect of the story, right? He didn't tell you everything, and then you cut out things for us, and then we cut out things for the readers. So it's funny how watered down it got, but I mean, I guess that's to kind of keep people from those extreme instances of the story that maybe don't need to be given to still give that.
It's still an exciting story, so I can only imagine if it had been unadulterated, just how off the rails it could have been, or what other material you have now for like another project, or just what other little nuggets you can share like later. It just goes to show just how much information one person can give you, but you don't have to give it all away.
Yeah. Well, and some of it you don't want to, and some of it, and to be honest, I think some of it people don't really want to hear. I was just talking to my dad about, I recall reading a long time ago about the film Schindler's List, and that there were just some things that could not be shown. And I gave an example to my dad, which I won't repeat here, but an atrocity that was carried out. And as soon as I said it, he just shook his head and said, "Yeah, of course you couldn't show that. Nobody wants to see that. We want to know, we want to understand, but then there are just some things you can't. And we have to respect that and deal with what we can. So it's like you said, each one of us took our part in watering it down, so we could create something that most people could pick up and read and connect with.
How do you think that Jerry's responses, when he went in deep on some of that stuff, how did they affect you personally?
I'll say that after a couple hours, because I would do the interview and then I would go back and listen to it and I would take notes. And one of the things Jerry mentioned, and it was in the version that I wrote, which I think was taken out of your version, but I'll touch on it here, was the fact that he had to get used to this process of eliminating. He used the term eliminating a target, which was killing somebody, and he had to do it, and he had to do it repeatedly. And we didn't talk about specifics, and we didn't talk about, other than I think the story you already related. But one thing that he said to me was that he started to disconnect from the process, and to the point where he almost became curious about the process, like how is this one going to die? and that's when he really realized he needed to get out of this. I mean, this was doing something to him. He didn't, it was changing him. And these were people, and he was, and that really affected me. Hearing these, accounts, I recall, finishing some notes and getting up and just having to walk around and kind of, wave my arms around a little bit and clear my head. And again, that was probably the watered down version that he was giving me. So
I think to some degree, that's a subject that we, because of our audience and because of what our focus is, that we shouldn't really shy away from. Soldiers, our NCOs in the Army, in the field, need to know that it's something that I mean, that's what we train for. To destroy the enemy,
right.
And that's that's what it means, and that's what the soldiers are doing in Ukraine. That's what's happening, right now as we speak. And I think it's not a subject we should shy away from. But to some degree, when it comes to the written version, we do have to, like it's been said several times, we do have to water it down. But that's when we have these kind of discussions here, where we can actually be honest about things and be a little more explore these kind of things, because when you look down the barrel at the enemy, it's like so many things go through your head so quickly, but you don't have a chance to really think about them. You just react. So, and I think it's important that we do talk about that. I know there's been several of us. I don't know if Sergeant Cox has had that experience. I know his predecessor, Sergeant Woods, had some experiences that were very traumatic for him, and things he had to do. And Tony, I know that you served as a. By the way, Tony was a corpsman with a Marine recon unit, so he's had some experiences as well. So it's, but I think again, it's not a subject we should shy away from. We're the soldiers that we deal with, that we serve in editing and publishing their stories. I think they need to be that this is a subject that we should explore to some degree.
Yeah,
I guess I could talk about some of the editing that went on, like with that specific thing. Just could be good for writers to know, like, how we think about things. So it had come up in several conversations talking about it, and we wanted to make sure that Jerry was sympathetic, like a sympathetic character, not just like a mindless killing machine, which is why we pared down some of that stuff and then kept in enough to either imply that was happening or kept in several of the instances that you had in there that were so powerful. So, like, we chose the most powerful of what we thought and then cut enough so that, the reader basically didn't just shrug Jerry off as like an 80s Arnold Schwarzenegger just racking up a body count. We wanted it to make sure that the reader, like, attached to Jerry and could feel a lot of that stuff.
No, I thought you guys did a great job. Reading it, I didn't, I know some writers get really irate, but just reading it, I felt it was really nice and balanced, and the stuff that you took out, you had good reason for doing it. So, no, I think it was great.
It was a fun read, man. I got to tell you.
Oh, man, I read it so many times.
Yeah. We all read it several times, and then we I don't know if you saw some of the artwork that we put in there, but the motion graphics, and then the still that Tony did, where the ghostly soldier kind of. I thought that those kind of things too allowed us to be a little more creative with some of the supporting artwork.
Yeah, the visual added a lot. I was really blown away when I saw that.
Yeah, we have more coming too, so just stay tuned.
Great.
Some cool things, and again, it allowed us some creativity from our end as well, and I think that it's all coming together. It all came together very well, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely.
Hope you guys write more or publish more stuff on Vietnam. That makes me happy.
Well, it makes us happy too, especially if we get good material like this. That was quite entertaining.
Tell your friends.
Exactly.
So I had a question on your writing journey, because we have a lot of writers. Most of our articles are from soldiers from the field, and they didn't grow up as writers or didn't grow up loving writing. I myself hated writing until I was like 26, and I randomly, accidentally took 2 writing classes in college because I wanted an easy A, and they were not easy at all. But I found like this writing avenue to talk about my experiences.
Sure.
But what was your journey? Were you always a writer? Did you have to learn how to do it? You know, just anything that would help nervous writers.
I always liked I always liked stories. You know, but I think I had a bit of a self-image problem. I just didn't think I was smart enough to be a writer. You know, like a writer was a smart person, you know. And so I really loved film, and so I ended up going to film school. But when I was there, it turned out everybody wanted to make the movie. Nobody wanted to write the script. And I wasn't too bad at it. I had a mentor who helped me out there. And so about halfway through, I switched from production to screenwriting. And that was okay with my self-image because I wasn't really a writer. I was a screenwriter. You know, I was creating a blueprint for a movie, you know, and so that was okay, you know, and I did that for a few years and I got some scripts out there. They didn't sell, but I got them out there and they did the rounds. But eventually, and I started teaching college and specifically writing courses, I found that the screenwriting format was just so stifling. So it was just, you can only use so many words in a screenplay. Everything has to be visual. You know, you can't explore thoughts. You can't explore emotions and flashbacks and things. And I just wanted to get free of that. And so that's when I started dabbling with you know, open writing, just like actual stories. And I did actually finish a novel this past year. It was a fantasy young adult, which I spent a couple of years on. And yeah, I think I'm getting more and more interested in just the short stories, articles like this. So in the end, I guess everybody's process is different. I would just say that if you enjoy writing, if you find there's pleasure there, keep doing it, you know, and do it. If you like it, do it, because it'll just make you better and better.
Yeah, my advice is always your first draft is just going to be terrible.
Oh, yeah.
You just get used to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually just finished a semester teaching fiction writing, and I had so many students who, you know, they did that first draft, and they're like, what, I'm not done? I thought I was done, you know, I got to revise. What is that, you know? But I remember thinking that too, so.
And one thing, too, when it comes to writing, whether it's something more story-like, like what you did now, or what you did for us, or more scholarly, as a lot of our articles are, the more you do it, the better you get at it. And for NCOs, the better you are at writing, I think the more it's going to affect your career.
Sure.
So the more you do it, the better you get at it. I think that the more it's going to open up avenues to get promoted, to have more responsibility. As much as some might not like more responsibility, the more responsibility you have, the more you're able to step up the ladder and get promoted and get more stuff.
If you can be a good writer, you're a good communicator. I mean, not just on the written word, but you see a writer communicate and speaking, you know, you can see them choosing their words and figuring out how they're going to say what they need to say. And communication will always be so important, no matter what business or what field you're in. You know, a good communicator is going to go further.
I mean, you guys are talking a lot about, you know, just get out there and write. But I think a lot of the greatest stories that we're going to receive or could receive would be from our junior soldiers. And they are not going to want to write anything. So what we do here at the NCO Journal is provide a service to you. I mean, you guys give us your submissions, your ideas, and we will make something out of that if it's a good idea. We don't care as much, and I'm sure Tony can, we don't care as much how great the article is written. It's just about what it is. And I think that's the biggest takeaway here.
Yeah, Tony will make it better. He needs a job, yeah.
That's right.
Well, just keep in mind that it is about, our focus is based on NCO professional development. So keeping that in mind, you have something to share. This is a place to share it, you know, as an NCO, as a leader.
I guess I could talk about some of the editing, and then I have so just for our writers, because hopefully many will listen, and I think that your first draft you sent us was incredible, because I love having so much material to work with, and then it's our job as editors to shape of like sections and make sure everything flows really well, and then again with it being palatable, like if, for instance, hypothetically, not saying that this was your draft, but if you have 3 harrowing instances. Like what is too much for the reader? When do they get numb to this? So we'll choose like the best one and focus a lot of emotion, or almost like, you know, you're talking about movies being melodramatic. Well, we kind of view it the same way sometimes with like, we want to make sure that it's a focus piece and not just like a ton of stuff. And again, generically for our writers, like everything gets edited.
Yeah.
And there's a team of 5 of us, so like something's getting cut. But
Yeah.
also, you talked about, so you met Jerry. You said there was like a year period where you had thought about interviewing or telling his story. Like, what kind of relationship did you have to build? And again, this is for writers that want to do interviews or want to like pass on like really good stories. Because I think you're a great example. And this is the first long interview that we've done, which is why I was so excited to do it. But it really opens the door. So you have opened the door for a lot of other writers. And I want to make sure that other writers know like your process and how you built up this relationship to get someone to talk about really hard stuff.
Yeah, it was trust. There was a great deal of trust. There were ground rules were laid out immediately for, of course, the anonymity. And also that there would be certain things that he did not want to talk about. I would ask a question and he would say no, or indicate in a polite way, no, we're not going that way. And I'm not a journalist by nature. But after, a little while, if I ran into a few of those questions, part of me was like, no, I want to know, and I had to respect that space and just accept that, we're not going in that direction. And I think because of that, he was willing to continue to meet with me. I hope he got something out of it as well. I hope I didn't, give him nightmares. At one point, I think he indicated that he just hadn't thought about a lot of these things in a long time. And he'd been, he had a phrase, I forget what he said. He put it away someplace in a locker in the back of his head or something like that. And so I had to really be appreciative that he was willing to, unpack that locker a little bit for me. So I guess trust and patience. I didn't try to dictate the conversation too much. I had questions that I wanted to ask him, but oftentimes once he started talking, it might go in a different direction I hadn't anticipated. And so I recorded all of our audio, and then I could go back and, and find little gems and things that he brought up. But trust was probably the biggest thing. I never wanted Jerry to feel as though I didn't have his back, or I was going to try and pull a fast one or something like that.
During the intro, I wrote I wrote about my experience that when I first came out of boot camp. I met the Korean War vet, and I so wish that I had done what you did and written down what he told me. He had some amazing stories. I don't remember the stories. I wish I did. I remember his missing fingers. I remember his toes, and like the fact that he was balding and his hair was white, and he was very intense. But I think when I talked to him, I think it was almost like he was releasing the floodgates. Myself, I'm a veteran myself. I served in the Marines for 20 years. Not something I normally put in that I put in the intro, but I served 20 years. I did 2 tours in Iraq, and I was in Desert Storm. And honestly, nobody ever really asked me about what kind of experiences do I have. What did I experience when I was out there? But I think, as many of our audience probably, especially the senior guys here, they've been, deployed and have their own stories. And I think something like this, being able to I guess unload it's almost like it's a therapeutic, I would say.
Yeah, I would hope so. Yeah.
So go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, just if the subject's willing, it's always. I guess it's tricky. One thing that Jerry indicated in the article is that he never went to a therapist. He never went to a psychologist. He didn't want to relate that to someone who hadn't been there. That was important to him. He dealt with it on his own, which I found to be fascinating. But in other cases, I guess what you're hinting at is just that, God, there's so many stories out there. And they all deserve to be told because of these extraordinary lengths. And I'm speaking as a civilian. I don't, I did not serve. But these individuals have what they've gone through and gone and done for their country. So if they're willing to speak, I really think we should listen.
Have you considered like a follow-up project, like doing more oral histories? Asking since I've done a few with like Andrew Wiest at Southern Miss when I was a grad student there, and And those are really cool, even just transcribing or talking with veterans, because you get some like cool nuggets like you have, stories that you otherwise wouldn't believe if you didn't have, have someone actually telling you or the transcript in front of you. And then, other people who like read that stuff, they're just like, they eat it up, or at the very least, that information is preserved there, whether it's just the recorded audio or that piece you pick out is now in a collection.
Yeah, I think it's a worthwhile endeavor. To be honest, I just kind of stumbled into this because I met Jerry. I knew Jerry. I thought of it. I'm not sure where I would start, and there's something else to it too, is if you become the guy who's going around trying to get people to tell you their story, I don't know. I mean, again, Jerry was a little reluctant, but he opened up and we formed a relationship. I guess I always want to respect people's privacy. I don't want to be seen as that guy who's trying to, get people to tell me things they might not want to tell me. But I would be, if I were to run into a similar situation, I might find myself drawn in again. And now that I've done this one, wanting to do another, maybe from a very different perspective, maybe a different war, a different conflict.
One of the things one of the questions that we sent to you, what do you have any war literature or inspiring material that you would recommend? And I have a few myself, but I want to know about if you have anything, Travis, that you could tell us about.
There's a book that really shaped my view of the Vietnam conflict. And I think it might be actually broken into two books. I think it's called Reporting Vietnam. And it was an assemblage of not just journalistic accounts, but also firsthand accounts. In fact, John McCain, I think, had an article in there too about his time as a POW. And it was quite. I remember one specific article written by a veteran in the Vietnam conflict, talking about pretending to be dead as he's laying there amongst his dead brethren, fellow soldiers, while the enemy walks among him. And that was the only way he got out of that, was he was with a squad that had just been wiped out. And I couldn't believe it. It just blew away any movie I'd ever seen. I just couldn't imagine being in that situation. So Reporting Vietnam. And then I recently read the book War by Sebastian Junger, which follows a group in Afghanistan, I think about 10 years ago. And that was really, really revealing to me as to, more modern warfare, and what those guys go through and what just the day-to-day is. I was just blown away.
There's several, just from my perspective, there's several books that I enjoy reading. Personally, I like reading historical fiction. There's a series called, or by an author called, or named Bernard Cornwell. It's called the Sharp series. It's on the Napoleonic Wars, and there's some lessons learned. It's about a soldier, a British soldier who ends up clawing his way to the officer ranks, and it was a whole different world back then. But I think there's lessons to be learned on leadership and that sort of thing in that series. It's quite a few books, but they're a good read, and I think that they would be something that would inspire writers because of the kind of stories that because for one thing you can learn about history, whether it's about Vietnam or Napoleonic Wars or whatever, and also be entertained by a fictional character that whoever writes about it can put it inside those situations. Which other series I would recommend would be the Casca series. It's about a soldier who lives through he can't die. He lives through the ages, only being able to live life as a warrior of some sort. So he goes to Vietnam, Korea, all the way back to the Middle Ages and before that. So it's just, I think there's interesting. Again, it's learning I think about history. I think is important, and I think that's something that ultimately NCOs in particular I think need to be well read. And I think history carries so many lessons, whether it's through history books, or even historical fiction.
Yeah.
I was always a poetry guy, and Here Bullet by Brian Turner. That was actually the book that got me started on everything that involved writing. And then Vietnam-wise, Yusuf Komanyaka, he had this Dien Kai Dao that was incredible. Just opened my eyes to so much and like what's possible for a veteran to write about. And then Hugh Martin had a great Iraq, and that's a guy that I've had many emails back and forth with. So, but also Rob, what do you suggest being a historian from there?
All right, so I'll start with probably one of the best books in terms of like oral histories of the Vietnam War, and it's one I read when I visited Vietnam in like 2011, and I hadn't heard of it before. I think other people have. I hope they have, but it's The Sorrow of War by Bao Ninh, and he was a North Vietnamese veteran, and it's his experience of fighting the war, so you get the other side, but it matches perfectly with what you would expect from like an American. The same visceral experience, the same questioning of what's the point, the same, same kind of deal with loss, experiencing destruction. It's visceral. It's really depressing. There's parts where you're like, I hope it gets better, but it just gets worse somehow. He was in the recent Ken Burns documentary in Vietnam, which was great to see him as a subject matter expert. Great book. You can read it really quick if you're willing to go through some of the really tough parts in it. And obviously everyone's probably heard of Tim O'Brien. So The Things They Carried, which is the book, probably the first book I read on Vietnam. I read it as an undergrad. I was like, that's Vietnam. And that's when I came back to, was like, yeah, that's Vietnam. Then there's the other book by him, If I Die in a Combat Zone, which is more of an autobiography. I think those two together are really good because one's more like made up, but yet seems so real. And that's like his whole point. That to tell a true war story, you have to introduce a lot of fiction, but yet it doesn't really matter because you weren't there. So there's a lot of cool stuff about that, and I think those are a really great way to introduce people not to only writing, but maybe to war in general, because it's not what they expect. It's not troops moving on a battlefield or, it's not like a chess game. It's here's an individual telling you about all the horrible things he encountered, or the mundane, like some of the, like just nothing was happening, or we were going through a jungle and it was miserable. But then also the bad things, the firefights, the monotony, the uselessness of the struggle. I think that's what's great about those Vietnam books. They all cover that. And the different perspectives, and they all kind of marry up, whether they're North Vietnamese or American. In a way, they all tell the same story. And one side from the side that's defeated, the other side's the victor. Yet they're all questioning the point. Like, they all suffered. What was the point of all this? We lost friends. We're all mentally scarred from this. We're trying to figure out what do we do going on, but yet we're broken. And so I think there's a lot of interesting lessons to pull from that, especially for someone like going back to Bao Ninh, where that's like not a popular thing to have in a communist country. That's like, we won this war, where we unified the Vietnamese people, and he's questioning, why, like the price they paid. So those books are really eye-opening to me, and I can't recommend them enough.
I'm glad you actually brought up the North Vietnamese. So same thing when I started reading. I should actually start with when I got out of the military, fresh off my deployment. I was kind of numb and almost like Jerry, like very hateful towards what I thought was the other side. Then I read Here Bullet, which also had some viewpoints from the other side, which, I guess were fictional, but it was a real maturity in him thinking about that, and that got me to show more compassion towards the other people. It really helped me, like, just be more mature about everything. And and grow as a person and a writer and a father, you know.
It's interesting you bring up that point because you served. It was pretty much one enlistment, right? It was 6 years.
Yeah.
So
With
your
an extension.
Yeah.
For my buddies, actually, because they were going, and so they said I had to extend for a year if I wanted to go with them. And I already missed out on the first time they went, so I wasn't going to let them go again.
Oh, so you weren't stop loss. You volunteered.
I volunteered to go again with my
look at you.
friends. So.
Hardcore. But see, that's what I'm saying though, is that your experience, because I was a lifer, you know, I was more senior than you when I deployed to Iraq, and your experiences, your point of view when you left the Army or the service, you were like, okay, yeah, wash my hands, I'm done. Whereas me, as having been in for 20 years, it was my life, and so when I left, it was I had a different perspective, and I think that is interesting that we talk about that, or that it's mentioned, because I think that's something that hopefully the younger guys can write something. The younger NCOs can send us stuff that'll put things more in their perspective. A lot of the stuff we have, which is great, is from senior NCOs. But it would be great if we could get things from the younger guys and, you know, hey, be honest, be straightforward, talk about your experiences. Although the young guys nowadays, maybe some of them might not have been gone to war or had those kind of experiences, but you can still write about things. With that, thank you so much for joining us, sir. It was a pleasure talking with you. It's a pleasure working on your article.
It's a pleasure to talk to all of you and hear from your experiences. You know, I'm just a guy who listened to a veteran, you know, for a few hours, but you guys have lived it. So,
well, we want to thank you, sir, for joining us and sharing your story. And a thank you to our audience. Remember to put your knowledge to the page, submit articles, and get published with the NCO Journal. Don't forget to check out our webpage, follow us on social media. We'll catch you next time on the NCO Journal podcast.